The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order. The Science, Innovation Technology Committee is in session, and today we continue our inquiry into commercialising quantum technologies. And to help us with that inquiry, I'm very pleased to introduce our first pair of witnesses, and they are Roger McKinlay. Mr. McKinlay is the Challenge Director for Commercialising Quantum Technologies at Innovate UK, and has been involved in the quantum world for a long time, was a member of the 2016 Blackett Review into Quantum Technologies. And joining Mr. McKinlay with us today is Anke Davis, who is the Head of Quantum Technologies at the EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council. Welcome, both of you, today. Perhaps I could start with a general question, perhaps first to Mr. McKinlay. How is UKRI supporting the commercialisation of quantum technologies through the programme? And I'll ask Anke Davis to comment as well.
I'm asked this question by international audiences, and I always give a rather trite answer, which says, well, the strengths of UKRI are many, but the two dominant councils have been EPSRC and Innovate UK. And EPSRC funds universities to work with companies, and Innovate UK funds companies to work with universities. And I've seen nowhere else with such a cunning combination. So we started out in 2014 with the creation of the hubs, which very much was getting the commercial, and it was commercialization from the start, getting the commercialization side on the science moving. And then, as you're well aware, in 2018 with the ISCF funding, we started a serious program of industry-led projects, collaborative projects, which include the universities as well. So that's been the bulk of what's been happening to date, over and above, of course, the significant amount of work that Innovate UK does in supporting business generally.
So I guess, how does one do it? We know how you can do pure research into quantum at the cutting edge of knowledge. How can support be given to commercialise, to transfer that knowledge, in other words, into practice?
So I think the most important thing is these collaborative programs in particular are the only real gateway into a program where we hear what industry wants to do. Because government and academia are full of ideas. When we put a call out, we ask a company to come up with a good idea, a collaborative idea, comes from a team, and we ask them to be very specifically say how they're going to exploit that commercially. And we hold them to account. So we monitor then through benefits how they're achieving. If they've said they wanted to grow, how many more staff have they taken on? If they're going to produce a product, have they produced it? And so I think what's important is we're reinforcing what they want to do, and that's actually made us attractive to a lot of businesses, including overseas companies, to the UK, because the starting point is you understand your business, you can spot the opportunities in commercialising quantum, we're going to help you.
As you say, Mr. McKinlay, that it was 2018, I think, when the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund was launched in this and other respects. We're now in 2024. Is it possible, nearly 6 years on, to point to successes and to evaluate whether that ambition to commercialise quantum technologies has happened?
There's a caveat, which is when a minister announces money, it's hanging in the air, ethereal. Okay, when we put it into a competition and say we are competing, running a competition to run projects of a certain value, it's becoming more real. When it gets offered as a grant offer letter, it's absolutely committed, and then we finally give the money to the company as a reimbursement of allowable costs. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a long way down the line. So we're still being invoiced, and we're still putting money out the door. It'll be 70 million this year on that portfolio of programs. So the money doesn't go in at the start. But having said that, we've to date put in about 220 million of grant funding. It's ISCF plus things like the Technology Missions Fund. Those programs, some of those are still opening. And the companies we fund, if we drew a perimeter around them, and we've been funding since 2018, have raised 610 million.
Raised in terms of matched investment?
Raised in terms of raised money to put alongside our grant to grow, not put into our programs, but they've gone out and raised it. That's by far the best measure, because sometimes, of course, our grant is the first money a company receives, and the match will come quite late in that. It comes, in fact, it's just not reimbursing all of their costs. So that 610, I think, shows quite a healthy ratio. And it also shows that we're not deluded, or we're just helping what we call grant jockeys, people who live off government grants, because they've already, as a portfolio, raised significantly more than we've put in and raised it in private money.
And is that proportion of matched funding, if we could call it that, or leveraged funding or whatever, did you have a particular ambition in terms of the ratio or requirement?
We had a cautious, I can't remember the exact figure, I think it was 105 million or something. But I'd have to go and check that figure. But we were certainly keen to see it matched. So I'd have been saying this isn't bad if I had 220 million of grant allocated to programs and 220 million having been raised. I'm obviously much more pleased with it being 610.
Very good. Perhaps I can ask Anke Davis. So you're the other half of the exceptional and unique approach that we have here. So Mr. McKinlay's talked about the Innovate UK side. In terms of the Research Council's side, tell us about how the programme to support research into quantum technologies has been conducted, and perhaps whether you judge it to have been a success.
Thank you. As Roger mentioned, we started in 2014 with hub investments into 4 different areas. Really, the UK as a trailblazer in setting up large collaborative efforts covering all of the UK, all devolved nations, and involving a large range of companies. At that time, this was new to the world. It has been emulated by other countries such as the United States. It has been seen as a success in combination with aspects such as a National Quantum Technologies Programme, so bringing government, industry and academia together, going alongside programmes such as the ICF programme. And really the reason why the hubs have been a success is they work on technology development at the research level stage. They bring this to a certain range where they have some company interests, some end user interests, but really where can it go from there? The ICF programme has enabled that research to go further, for those collaborations to be taken into the commercialisation space. And we see that through a number of spin-out activities that have come out from the 2 successive phases of hubs, with over 30-ish spin-out companies, ranging all the way from what may be abstract quantum computing all the way through to gas sensing to allow for environmental sustainability, or medical devices to improve surgical outcomes and cheaper approaches, or things like diagnosis of epilepsy in children and allowing for better treatment. So really a range of different application areas that we are keen to foster and support, and through the combination of the academic excellency base and the collaboration with industry, that has been possible.
Thank you. You said that the US has emulated this approach. I assume you mean by establishing these quantum hubs. Is that right? Is there evidence that they've actually emulated it rather than just done the same thing, or we've emulated them?
So the US program started significantly later. I believe their 5-year hubs are coming to an end later this year or at the beginning of 2025. And those have been the first range, so we had 5 years of hubs prior to their efforts in this area. And by us launching a competition for a 3rd phase of hubs to start this year, we are already setting the scene for what's to come. We have strong ambitions in this area, and we have been outspoken about wanting to continue to support the academic excellency base in the UK. In the US, the discussions are at a different stage, but that is down to their discretion, of course.
Thank you. And finally from me, before I turn to Chris Clarkson and Carol Monaghan, in terms of the funding landscape, it's great that there's obviously a kind of a complementarity between your two organisations, but you're still under the one umbrella organisation. Is it necessary to have a separate organisation, as it were, focused on business investment, working with universities, and a different one focused on universities, working with business? Could this be better done in a single organisation?
So we are part of UK Research and Innovation, so that is our umbrella organisation. By representing the two different communities, we can bring strengths to the table. Roger's extensive industrial experience, for example, equips him very well in speaking to the industry community and being open to their ideas and approaches. And then from the academic side, to have representation, I think, is equally important, because we need to be able to marry up the different approaches and bring them together to co-create the success that we've had.
Absolutely. And certainly that was part of the vision of the Nurse Report in creating UKRI. But I guess, just as a kind of thought experiment, could the EPSRC deal directly with businesses, or would that be kind of out of its comfort zone, as it were?
We are doing that in some respects, recognising that Innovate UK's strength lies in that area. We're not trying to impose ourselves into the same territory. We have some schemes that allow for academic and industry partnership at a 50-50 level. That is through the prosperity partnerships, and that is coming up more and more through the community and has increasing interest. However, a strong commercialisation focus rather than an academic-driven research focus is, I think, very important to have the two going alongside each other.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McKinlay, briefly then.
Yes, just briefly. I think there is a big difference. There is the principal investigators and hub directors have to be given freedom. It's discovery-led research still. On Innovate UK, we do drive pretty hard to deliver the benefits from the programme. So we monitor, we have significant teams of monitoring officers. And even our vehicles for collaborative R&D, the SBRI has been very successful, require quite a significant commercial team in terms of carrying out due diligence. So I think don't underestimate the maturity of these vehicles. And I would actually like to see even a bit more of a divergence in the sense, I think Innovate UK speaks very well for business. I think some of the bigger industrial landscape features, companies of a certain size, companies being able to pick up, industry is the engine of commercialisation. Mm-hmm. I think we could even do more for. So I actually think the differentiation is well justified at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Chris Clarkson, then Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Davis, you alluded to this third phase of the National Quantum Technologies Programme. How are you ensuring that's going to be a success, and what to you does a success look like?
Thank you. To ensure success, we have looked and consulted with the community to define what the new areas of hub development should look like. So we have refined, in line with evolution of the areas, the scope of what development, what research programs we would want to see. We have allowed the current and new consortia to form and to provide bids into the competition, and we've seen 9 high-quality bids, of which up to 5 will be funded. And so a success has been that in the past, the hub teams have really driven the technology development and have significantly been able to leverage funding through commercialisation streams such as the ICF programme to take those products into the commercialisation space. So we are looking for equal kind of successes in the future. In seeing co-creation between industry and academia in developing these programmes, we have also seen significant interest to co-invest in the programme, and we are going to build upon that and ensure that companies stay engaged throughout the throughout the research programs. One way of doing that is already being done by government through a national quantum strategy, which has increased interest of companies and academics in this as a high priority area, as well as quantum missions that highlight which areas we would like to drive forward the commercialization. So in that we capitalize on the interest from academia and industry alike.
Have you taken any specific learnings from the first two phases to change your approach at this stage, or are you sort of carrying on as is?
As I mentioned, we have opened up the competition to allow for existing as well as new collaboration teams to come together. So that means both at the academic level as well as the industry level, we are open to new combinations of people. That ensures that we have the best teams possible that come together in the UK, and we have seen some changes in where people specialise in a different area coming from previous. In the first two phases, we had a set of groups that came together and were forming a new construct. And through the second phase, we have increased our support through a diversity of activities, meaning we have more strength and more people that we can draw on. It was important for us to give them an opportunity to come in and join a hub programme that is substantial over 5 years if they wanted to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you. If I can come first of all to Dr. Davis, how confident are you that UKRI can deliver on National Quantum Strategy's aim to have 1,000 PhD students in quantum-related programmes by 2033?
Firstly to say, we're excited that we are a strong partner as UKRI in helping to deliver the postgraduate training aspects of the strategy. The strategy covers not just UKRI but other partners as well. We are in a strong position, having just announced 3 new CDTs as well as additional doctoral training partnerships that will help to give a significant contribution.
CDT, that's Centre for Doctoral Training?
Yes.
Yeah, for people that may be watching.
Apologies, I meant to say this out and I did say it for the other one. And I have to caveat at this point that the terminology is going to change by UKRI in a couple of months. We will stick to the terminology that is used to the committee and members of the community at this point.
Okay, and just into CDTs in a bit more detail, how are you making sure that the CDTs that are running or are proposed are properly aligned with the quantum strategy?
We had a highlight notice within the CDT call to highlight that quantum technologies is a very important topic within the EPSRC remit and thus encourage specifically applications in this area. We highlighted that there are a number of different aspects that are important, such as entrepreneurial training and links to industry, which is a very important feature of the Centres for Doctoral Training. We also highlighted the need to work with government departments and government needs in general. Through the peer review process, we have been able to assess the proposals, and the 5 bids that were successful have covered a wide range of different topics, thus providing the strong base of training across all areas of quantum technologies that are outlined in the strategy. And
in terms of CDTs, which ones are working specifically in quantum?
We have 5, if I may refer to my notes so that I get these right and not wrong. So we have everything from quantum information science, quantum technology engineering, quantum computation and communications, applied quantum technologies, quantum informatics, as well as aligned areas such as semiconductors. And through that, we are able to cover England, Wales, and Scotland.
That was my next question, was the geographical spread.
Yes, so there is a geographical spread that is also represented through current hubs as well, will be through future hubs as well.
Can I ask another question? We've talked about 1,000 PhD programmes in quantum relevant disciplines. Fine, okay, you're confident about that. Can I ask, is there any analysis, overview, check of whether money is following diversity when we're looking at supporting young people in these hubs?
Do you mean hubs or do you mean...
Sorry, in CDTs, let's go CDTs. Yep.
It is the same approach for both,
yep.
So I can clarify that at this point. Hubs, as well as Centres for Doctoral Training, collate information on their recruitment, and with hubs and CDTs, they follow an equality, diversity and inclusion plan. For hubs, we have assessed that as part of the peer review process, for CDTs as well as at the interview stage, to probe and question whether they are able to provide an inclusive environment that encourages people from diverse backgrounds to join. And that goes across all the different criteria included in EDI. Hubs do have an EDI plan as well that we monitor on an annual basis, and where we probe questions.
And okay, so you're monitoring, which is stage one. What action is taken if you're finding that CDTs or hubs are not actually meeting targets in terms of diversity, in terms of women, in terms of who they're recruiting?
It is normally, I say monitoring, because UKRI has not stepped and taken active action in this area regarding recruitment. We have, through previous CDTs and current CDTs, seen very positive diversity data. So we would be expecting that they continue on a positive footing. I'm not able to comment at this point in time what the steps would be if we discovered that they are not meeting the criteria. I think that's something to follow up on.
Because the committee looked last year, the year before, about diversity in STEM. I wonder, is there some way you could follow up with the committee with some of the data that you're referring to at the moment? Because it would be quite interesting for us to have a look at that.
Yes, certainly we can.
Thank you. And finally, can I ask how UKRI is working with industry to support apprenticeship and technician programmes in quantum?
We have a specific part of the programme where colleagues from the Science and Technology Facilities Council, STFC, are working on. I have a few brief notes on that, but I'm not the expert. I'm happy to follow up in writing if you would like further information. I think what's important to note is that STFC as an employer has won a number of awards for their apprenticeship programs, and have facilities across the country to allow for apprenticeship trainings. They are working on creating a quantum-specific apprenticeship training program, and are consulting with industry as well as other stakeholders to ensure that the design is fit for purpose. They're hoping to start in the very near future. I'm happy to confirm the timings of that in writing, because it's our colleagues' expertise rather than our own.
Thank you, I appreciate it. It's something that is raised with us fairly regularly, is the lack of skills or the skill shortage at technician apprenticeship level, so it would be useful. But, thank you.
Could I add, sorry, the high value manufacturing catapult, for example, runs apprentice schemes as well. Generally, what we've been doing on the Innovate UK side, of course, is creating the pull. So this sector we've been growing is placing demands, and we're beginning to get from our own sector a pretty clear idea now of the sort of skills which growing this new part of the economy will require.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I bring Graham Stringer in, just Mr. McKinlay, on that, is it part of the remit and the practice of UKRI at the moment to be requiring apprenticeship programs, for example, where you make commercial investments or disbursements in order to be able to bring forward the skills that are needed to commercialise technologies?
I know we are keen on apprenticeships. Where there's a requirement or quotas in the system, I don't have any visibility. I think it's certainly on the quantum side. One of the clear pictures emerging at the moment is that little bit of quantum physics at the heart of a project creates an enormous number of what I think Ian Walmsley giving evidence called fierce engineering challenges. I liked his expression. And that is rippling down to the need for technician support and apprentices and broader engineering.
Given that Dr. Davis was talking about the Centres for Doctoral Training, which is about making sure that the next generation of researchers are coming up, should there be not a parallel requirement on the Innovate side to make sure that the supply of technicians is being created in the explicit way that the Research Council side of the fence does it?
I think it should fall within Innovate's remit. I'd be very keen if on quantum we did something that companies are contributing. It is very difficult to train up, I think, some of these skills in isolation of industry. And if they're being trained within industry, I'd expect some financial support from industry. So I think that is a picture which will emerge as our sector grows.
Thank you, Mr. McKinlay. I'm turn to Graham Stringer and then Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Just if I can follow up Greg's question, why is it not visible, the requirement for apprenticeships? Why do you not know?
Well, I think, first of all, in a new sector, how do we know anything? And we conduct surveys.
Fundamental philosophical question.
Absolutely.
It's slightly easier to know
the right
whether there are
committee
apprenticeships.
There's a reason for that, which is otherwise we're just guessing or we're thinking that we know best. So we do conduct surveys of the companies we're funding, and we do look at their skills needs. I think there's a broader issue here, which is why there's a skills task force being formed, which I think DSIC can probably talk more about, to look at the whole skills issue. I would say from my experience, it's very easy to get into skills push discussions because people in the business of education and training love to say, have more. And I think it is difficult, as I've just articulated, to really pin down what industry is requiring. And remember, industry will fix its problems the best way it can. And with some of these new companies, they're not looking at problems they currently have, they're anticipating obstacles to future growth. And that's not just going to be the skills, it's going to be the investment in infrastructure, etc.
What are the constraints and difficulties you've found in running the Challenge Fund, and have you overcome them? How have you gone about overcoming them?
I think the coming in new to Innovate UK, I think what I call the products of Innovate UK, these well-proven vehicles like collaborative R&D programs, feasibility studies, the Small Business Research Initiative, I think they've proven enormously useful. I think we do need to think about whether some new products needed to be added to that. One of the grumbles we get from companies is, can you help us with capital? And quantum is a capital-intensive business. So that's something which we have been giving some thought to. But every competition I've run has been 2 or 3 times oversubscribed. And in recently, the number of fundable programs which I could have funded had there been more money has been quite high. So I actually think one of the obstacles I've seen is, even though it looked a brave decision 7 years ago to fund ISCF Wave 3, I think we could have invested more.
It's interesting. My experience, and I suspect experience of lots of witnesses that have come before this panel, if you're funding, supporting business, people who have products, try to fit into your definitions. Is there a definitional problem about what is quantum? Because at one level, everything is quantum. Every chemical reaction is...
You should have seen a number of the applications we had from AI companies saying AI is a sort of quantum, isn't it? So we were very specific with a physical definition at the start, which we worked with the hubs on. And we said, we think if companies are addressing this particular physical properties, then they're really addressing quantum, the physics we want them to address. And of course, we also included the software, which had to be an understanding of the sort of software a quantum computer could run, not software generally. Now, Since then, we broadened that scope to say, having learned what the kernel of this activity was, to say, and overcoming some of the scaling up challenges, which are broader engineering ones. But I think we got it right, because I think it's now at something like 150 odd companies we funded. But there is some cohesion there. They're not all startups, and some of them are applying quantum, but they correlate very strongly with the growing membership of UK Quantum, for example. So I think our initial physical criteria, if I can call them that, did a very good job of starting what is genuinely a sector without, you didn't use the expression, but I'll use it, too many hangers-on, okay, after the funding.
Is it possible for you to supply the committee with that definition of the particular physics you're interested in?
We can do that. I will provide.
I don't expect you to.
I would. But it was, for example, entanglement, and it was. We were very specific in wanting to support single photon sources and detectors, which could have been. So we in a bit of legalese in one paragraph. And we'll provide the committee with a paragraph as it appeared in the competition.
That's excellent. Another problem we find regularly with funding projects is that the witnesses regularly tell us that funding is too short-term, and they want more certainty about funding in the future. Do you find that's a problem?
Well, I am finding it now, but I was blessed when I picked up a challenge director's role, because after the initial 20 million of Pioneer, I got 7 years. The Treasury gave us 7 years of uninterrupted funding, which took us from 2018 and we'll finish at the end of March 2025. That has enabled us to focus on what's important, which is what we're funding, not getting hold of funding. I have about, in terms of cash out the door, about 70 million has gone out the door this financial year. Another 70 will go out the next year. The problem I have is the year after that it will be about 4, as my current forecast is, because we come off the end of the spending review. Now, having announced a 2.5 billion commitment to quantum in the future, for companies to see that kind of cliff edge, I think is going to be difficult to explain.
Final question from me. You were talking in your first comments about these businesses invoicing you as they went along. And
yes,
you were holding them to account for jobs created, etc., etc. What do you do if they're not meeting those particular targets? Do you withdraw funding, or what is the consequence?
It depends. So I would say, of course, if we're funding a consortium, the non-performance of one company, we do have to address, but we don't want to pull the funding on everyone else. And so we have had discussions within a consortium, and it's not just non-performance. What if a company ceases to trade, for example? It's much more difficult if the leading company of a consortium who submitted the great vision of how this was going to benefit them and help them grow their business. If that company fails, it's more difficult, and we either have to find some kind of agreement or terminate the project. But remember, we're not wanting a widget delivered out of these projects. We've got 13 benefits we're monitoring frequently. So normally we say, is it worth this program continuing? Are we still accruing these benefits? But it's some pretty difficult discussions. And I'm very well supported by a commercial team in Innovate UK, who not only do the due diligence at the start, but can wade in. What if we have a suspicion of fraud, for example? We've had to deal with that as well. So I'm reliant on some commercial support, which is good as I've seen in industry, I've got to say. I can only sing its praises.
And how many projects have you pulled the plug on?
I think I don't think we've had several fail to start. Sometimes that's good news, because there's a bit of honesty. They say, look, we've pivoted. In fact, a brand new startup pivoted and left a grant on the table. So we have projects failed to start. I don't know the exact number, but I can't recall out of the 200 odd projects we're running now having something totally fall apart in midstream.
The answer to the question is none.
So I would have to come back to you with how many. Let me be very specific. If I came back with a figure, it would be how many projects have ground to a halt with less than half the grant having been spent. I think that would be how I would search the database.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, just on that, I mean, given that this is a series of kind of cutting-edge technologies, you would expect quite a few to fail, just as innovative businesses generally, some don't work out. And if there were none or very few, might that be concerning that this was indicated to kind of conservative approach?
Yeah, let's disentangle two sorts of failure. If there's a huge bust-up, I mean, some of our projects have 15 or 16 collaborators. If there's a huge bust-up and they all fall out, that is not a good situation. So keeping these teams together and achieving things is really important. One machine breaking can put a 6-month delay in a program. Difficulty in supplying devices, supply chain issues can delay programs. So we fight our way through that. But what we don't do in particularly the early collaborative projects has changed a bit with some of the recent small business research initiatives where we're buying products. Of course, is we're not holding them to account for a particular technical level of performance, because actually it's very interesting to know they couldn't make it. Because it gives us an idea of a maturity. So someone says, we can build a laser with these properties. If at the end of a project they've got a laser and it is still marginal on the line width or something, say, well, we now know how difficult that is. Now, as we move towards SBRI, yes, we want these products to be usable, particularly with a government customer, and there we're paying more attention to the achievement of technical milestones.
Thank you very much. Rebecca Long-Bailey and then James Davis.
Thank you. Mr. McKinlay, you've already mentioned the symbiotic roles of EPSRC and UKRI. But could you elaborate a little bit more about how Innovate UK has been able to double private sector investment into the Commercialising Quantum Challenge Fund?
So I think, so first of all, you've got to understand why we have quantum companies, why they want to stay in the UK, and why overseas companies are setting up in the UK, and why I'm desperate for that to continue. And it is the ecosystem. It is the proximity of the world-class research in the universities, many of whom have been running hubs, and all of whom are part of hubs. It is the skills coming out of the centres for doctoral training. And it is the way that clusters form and why certain countries have found themselves stronger in certain technologies than others. And on top of that, of course, if we're getting that right, the sector is growing. But I would say, that the real thing you need is this vibrant, healthy, growing industry, and to keep it attractive. And I think the thing which has surprised me, this is going to sound rude to some of my colleagues, but I've come from a very technical industry, aerospace. But when it comes to collaboration internationally and it comes to raising investment, the sheer kudos associated with outstanding science has an enormous impact. So we have, and this is why the new hubs are so welcome, because we need high-profile, smart people, and then industry is attracted to that. There's no doubt about it, and it's attracted in terms of help with difficult problems. They are attracted in terms of getting hold of good people.
Thank you. And in terms of commercialising quantum technologies, how is UKRI, Innovate UK and the government working together to drive that commercialisation?
Well, of course, it gets more difficult as you get more ambitious and the sector grows bigger. I think how do you stay joined up? And the new vehicle for this, I think being challenge-led in the past, the relationship which we've had with EPSRC, you've seen, has been very strong. Now we're talking about missions. Now we're talking about a grander vision. And that introduces some other players, which we've recently introduced in the Catalyst programs. We've just announced, for example, where we have government as a customer. And that's an important part of the mix. So keeping this all together does involve bringing in government users and government customers, partly because then you've got educated people in terms of making policy decisions, making future procurement decisions, spotting the societal benefits and so on. So it's a really important element, which is to grow the government footprint. The National Quantum Computing Centre, one of its main jobs is that engagement both externally and within government.
And finally, you mentioned the funding cliff edge, going from 20 million out the door all the way down to 4, which is quite staggering.
70 to 4 in terms of 1
to
year. 4 or 5. We've yet to work out what that 25, 26 year will look like, but there are enormous constraints, and it is between SRs, yeah.
What would you like to see from government in terms of future funding? And secondly, what would you like to see specifically in terms of funding programmes for commercialisation of quantum technologies?
So I would like to see us be able to bridge that gap by a bit more than 4, and we're working with DCIT and UKRI are obviously working on that, and it's related to how much of core funding UKRI can put in. But in the longer term, I think, remember the demands of the sector grow. That 610 million I mentioned, which we've over 7 years seen our companies raise, they're going to probably have to raise that again in the next 3 years. That's what growth means. So I think if we've been in peak years putting about 70 million out the door for the ISCF type programs, I would say if the program is really helping the sector to grow in the future, that figure could be funding, for example, missions could be over 100 a year. I don't want to preempt, when planning haven't taken place, but it's got to grow, and we will get the benefits with the growing industrial sector, and the UK remaining a go-to place for quantum, which it is at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Clearly implicit in what you just said in answer to Rebecca is your view that this should continue, that this shouldn't be the end of the programme. Is that, would you say, accepted within UKRI? Because there is another way of thinking about it, that you have these programmes to kickstart, as it were, a sector that has commercial potential, that it takes flight, and you do the same for another. Just talk me through what you experience as the internal view on that debate.
There are two aspects to this. One is, as we've seen with ISCF, what we would call managed funds, and where I think the missions way will go, is should the UKRI still be using its resources to deliver? And I think yes, and I think that's generally well accepted. How much of UKRI's core might go in the future is currently unknown. And I'm saying that really with my industry hat back on, which is whether people appear to be supportive and what the general mood is one thing. You have to get an agreed budget. You have to see what your future funding is. And we're still, in terms of looking at core over the next 5 years, that conversation is still taking place.
Okay, thank you. And finally for this session, James Davis.
Thank you, Chair. So clearly we've already touched on the infrastructure that exists in this country around quantum technologies, but specifically how are UKRI's national facilities supporting commercialisation of this technology? Dr. Davis first.
Yeah. I will start. I'm sure
yes.
Roger has additional elements to mention. We have a number of different facilities that help with that. Roger mentioned the National Quantum Computing Centre. You've had Michael Cathbert as a witness here before. Yep. In addition, there's the Hartree Centre up in Daresbury that is working on bringing quantum technologies together with businesses, specifically in that area, but all across the country. The Rutherford Appleton Laboratory in Didcot also has a program to bring quantum to companies and bring companies into quantum. So there are a number of different aspects where this happens with an official labelling of quantum. There are other ways this is happening for example, through engagement with catapults, so existing other larger infrastructures in nascent areas such as semiconductors. What can these areas bring to the table for quantum where there are overlaps? The photonics industry is another one where we're bringing together different aspects that are beneficial to the quantum technologies ecosystem. And all of these facilities have the ability to include new partners. They will have a model of engagement. These models may vary depending on the facility, but they all are open to engaging with new partners.
Okay. And what work is taking place to develop more such facilities, work with universities and industry?
So you might have heard about the RAN infrastructure review that is looking at industry support with regards to infrastructure specifically. And we have seen keen interest from industry and academia to provide information around that. I believe there are aspects such as access for industry to academic facilities. So thinking about smaller companies not being able to have their own fabrication facilities, for example, where can they access those? There are several universities with individual strengths across the country that do have those, and ensuring that companies are aware of where they can tap into those.
Okay, and Roger McKinlay, do you have anything to add on that?
Let me just run quickly through a list. Okay, so who do our companies love when they're going for infrastructure? They love NPL. NPL's key.
It's the National Physical Laboratory.
The Fraunhofer Centre for Applied Photonics appears in many collaborations. To a lesser extent, the digital catapult and compound semiconductor catapult, so the catapults are involved. And so remember, we get an indication of demand. We haven't had a quantum catapult. We've been well served by the organisations I've mentioned so far. On the manufacturing side, that is going to be scaling up manufacturing. That's going to be a different story, and that's why we're watching that Royal Academy of Engineering report when it lands in, I hope, a few months' time.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, then, coming on from the idea of a catapult, would a National Advanced Quantum Manufacturing Centre similar to AMRC in Sheffield be a good thing? And if so, would UKRI lead on it?
I would say there's such a broad spectrum of manufacturing associated with quantum that I would think, I personally would be unhappy to see the Q word above the door, but if we looked at where the benefit might be greatest, it might be to decide, for example, that we need a real boost in photonics. This is really what the Royal Academy of Engineering study is looking at. I would say it's really important to realise that universities will always make a strong case that they can help prototype and take the process so far. But remember, pilot manufacturing is done by someone who intends to manufacture. So I think missing in our landscape at the moment is attracting some manufacturing companies, or the creation of them, who say, we think there's a job for us and it's making the stuff.
Any final comments?
UKRI has experience in setting up different types of centres and programmes. Like Roger said, I think it's important to note that for the quantum area, there's a range of aspects to consider. So certainly partnerships between different funders, different government partners would need to be considered before making such a decision.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to kind of push that a bit further to Mr. McKinlay, I mean, do you think a catapult would be a good, do you think it's missing in the ecosystem of catapults, should there be a quantum one?
I think the ecosystem has been filled by the demand of the companies very effectively by the digital or the compound semi in particular, the Fraunhofer and, let's say, the work of NPL. So I think to some extent we missed, we've got through the catapult stage without one. I do think, though, that we're going to have to watch. I'll go back to the reason the Royal Academy of Engineering is doing this study is we need to look really carefully at where there may be some barriers to scale up.
Can I thank both witnesses for helping us in our first session this morning. I'm going to welcome our next pair of witnesses. and I'll introduce them as they take their seats. Very pleased to welcome Andrew Griffith, who is the Minister of State for Science, Research and Innovation in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, late of this committee, where he was a very much valued member of the committee for a good part of this Parliament. And I think your first appearance as a witness before your old committee, Andrew, so welcome to us, coming back to us. And Tom Newby, who is Deputy Director and Head of the UK Office for Quantum at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. He was appointed as Head of the UK Office for Quantum in September 2023. Thanks for coming. Perhaps I could start with the Minister and ask, you may have heard that there are some impressive statistics in terms of the impact that the programme has had, but some concern about a prospective cliff edge in funding that, in the context of long-term commitments, could stop the momentum. What's your view of that as the Minister?
Yeah, well, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the invitation to appear today, and thank you for the very thoughtful work you've done on this inquiry as part of the preparation for today. I read all of the witness transcripts. It's a good piece of work, very thoughtful. If you want us to react to your report in due course, I'd be very happy to do so. And there are some points that we will take away quite rightly that you raise. Look, the access to long-term funding is something I think we'll all be familiar with as parliamentarians operating within cycles, the inability of Parliament generally to bind its successors. That said, there is a recognition in the importance of quantum, and I think that sends a very strong signal to the sector. There'll always be some shading in as to what that turns out into funding for particular programmes, for particular institutions. It is this current Chancellor that made the commitment for 2.5 billion over the next 10 years, building on the very successful work that was done over the preceding decade, where over $1 billion has been invested. Quantum is one of the 5 science and technology framework strategies, a document published just over a year ago, again by this Prime Minister, and setting out a very clear hierarchy of the technology priorities that we see. As you've heard from other witnesses, there's a very strong institutional base now being built in quantum. It's that institutional base that will be coming forward with the detailed proposals as part of the spending review. So much as though I would love, and I'm sure it will be, one of the strong views that's not unhelpful from the committee to hear about the need to provide confidence, clarity and certainty of funding, there is nevertheless in that hierarchy of a broad-based, I think, cross-party consensus about the desirability of funding research and development in the UK, a magnitude that will reach 20 billion a year for the first time for the fiscal year we're just about to go into at the start of April. I think that's broadly based. I think with that hierarchy that's been laid out about the importance of quantum, the fact it's a transformational technology that operates across a number of sectors, we all know how broad it is as a set of technologies, that the sector, if they're listening, should understand that certainly this government has the highest level of commitment to deliver that 2.5 billion of funding. And I know that people will already be starting to work on what that looks like in terms of a spending review.
Okay, before I go to Karen Monaghan and Catherine Fletcher, there's been mention made of already this morning about the Royal Academy of Engineering's report that they've been commissioned to undertake into the infrastructure supporting the UK's quantum capability. Has that report been received in the department?
No, well, I certainly haven't seen it.
Mr. Newby?
We have an interim report and we're working to finalise the draft for next month.
Next month you'll...
Yes.
When you say you're working, you're in what, dialogue with the...
Yes, we're talking... the Office for Quantum is working with the Royal Academy of Engineering. They've given us an interim report. Right. We've asked them to look into a few additional areas for us before they hand over a final product, which we expect them to also publish next month.
I see. So that was going to be my next question. So you expect to get the final report next month and publish it straight away? Is that the intention? Okay, thank you very much. Let me turn to my colleagues, starting with Carol Muller.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, can I ask first of all how the Department is working with both academia and industry to define the quantum missions that were announced last autumn?
There's extensive engagement going. We remember the 5 quantum missions. Those were high-level missions. There's work going on, specialist working groups and engagement behind each of those that will come up to us later this year. I think we aim to publish that before the summer, to turn those high-level missions into specific sets of plans. But the answer is using all of the engagement architecture that exists, the Office for Quantum, which is lead within government, the quantum hubs themselves are condensing points for thoughts around that, and we know there's a very strong sort of academic leadership in that. So I would hope if behind that question is any sense that isn't happening as it should, please let us know. We're very keen to make sure that engagement happens properly.
Can I ask a wee bit more specifically about the missions? I mean, we've got timescales for all of the missions attached to them. One is 2025, which is fairly short term, 3 or 2030, and there's one that's 2035 relating to quantum computers. Now, we've had some evidence from Dr. Chris Irvin, who's concerned that the long-term nature of some of these missions could endanger the UK's position as a leader in this. And we just wondering whether there would be some merit in having shorter term targets within these longer term missions. Is there any sense of that within the department, or has that been considered just now?
I think I'll let Tom come in, but I think it's a very good point, and clearly, as you go from a mission into a plan, that plan is likely to have a set of milestones so that one can rightly track progress towards that longer-term mission target being achieved. So I think the answer to that is yes, Carol.
To add, so we have 2 short-term missions, one on computing and one on position, navigation and timing, out for 2 years, which is sort of geared towards the current programme. And then we have the kind of longer-term 10-year missions, and alongside those we have set out interim milestones. And we think it's absolutely important that you break that down, and that's what we're doing our industry engagement on now, is how do you design programmes in the near term to move us towards those missions. I would say, though, that having that long-term ambition and making it really concrete has been well received by industry, and they're ambitious, but we also think achievable. And so we do think there is a balance there between outlining programmes that will help us get there, but also setting a long-term ambition that sets direction and helps guide investment as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's the vision rather than the nuts and bolts to get you there. In terms of the nuts and bolts to get there, is there going to be publication of these milestones that you're describing?
So we did publish the milestones at the autumn statement. So if they're published alongside the strategy at the moment. So you have the high-level strapline missions and milestones underneath them. We plan to provide further detail on how we'll deliver against those milestones before the summer.
That's part of the plans.
How you'll deliver and how you'll evaluate?
Yes.
So if we are 2 years from now and we find that things are not hitting targets, what's the actions then? Well, that's one for the Minister. Given there may be an election between now and then, Minister.
Let's take it, as one always would, one step at a time. So we've set out some ambitions. I think they're the right balance between ambition and what's been told to us by industry that they can realistically achieve, that will keep us on a par with other leading quantum nations. We're one of the 3 leading quantum nations, and those missions are sized to ensure we continue to do that. The next thing we need to do is break down and have credible plans behind those missions. So you set out the top level where you're trying to get to. The plans itself will be how we get there and what are the detailed milestones along the way.
And I'm asking how you're evaluating whether you've met the milestones.
Correct. And as part of that, the Office for Quantum tracks delivery on all of our objectives, whether it's delivering an extra quantum hub, how the National Quantum Computing Centre is doing, and how we will be tracking towards those. And we'll provide transparency along the way. these are operating in an external market anyway, there will be transparency as to how we are tracking towards those. As for then what is the remedial action, it'll be the same menu of tools that we always have, which is to divert funding to the right place, to be held to account by this and other committees, and to use steering boards within the department, within the Office for Quantum, to hold people to account for their part of the delivery of those plans. But the first thing is to share with you those plans. They're being formed as we speak by the industry with the department, and we will share those as soon as they're ready.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Catherine Fletcher next.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, nice to see you on that side of the horseshoe with your continued enthusiasm, but not on this one. So we're talking about something that's really exciting. We are closing the gap between bleeding edge research and things that have got practical and commercial value. So I just want to dive into how we make sure we get a commercial bang for our buck, and unusually kind of putting aside my love for the pure science of it. So almost as a follow-up to Carol's question, how are we making sure that we are not funding a load of stuff that's wonderful and theoretical, but at best is a novel party game? What's the commercialisation approach in the department?
It's very strong. I mean, we track it strongly. That's always one of the considerations when we look at allocating funding. There's a big role for government as a customer in these emerging domains, how we can use government money to sort of pull people through that process, but also look at wherever it's possible to match fund. So either by design of a particular programme from something like Innovate UK, or by simply looking at the areas of greatest interest and supporting those companies that are starting to scale, are starting to be close to that point of commercialisation. And I think we've got a good track record. When I look back at who some of the big companies are in this space, you can see exactly that they've often come from what was a quantum hub or QTech or something like that. The nomenclature changes over time, and then they've started to scale. Government's been putting in grants, often government's putting capital through things like the patient capital scheme, and then they've scaled thereafter. And so we track as closely as anything the success of the UK companies, the spin-outs, the scale-ups that are doing that.
So are you tracking turnover, commercial deals signed, profitability? I'm so old.
Valuations and capital
I'm so old.
raised.
I remember the internet bubble where there was an awful lot of people getting an awful lot of both private and public capital to do stuff that never really actually turned into a commercial product, even though it undoubtedly drove the internet forward. Yeah.
No, we are tracking exactly that. I mean, one of the great, your biggest strength is often your biggest weakness, and the other way around. So we don't have any of the sort of domestic big global tech players, right? So that can be a weakness in trying to scale. It means that we've got to use private capital and public finance well to achieve our goals. The flip side is that we are in many ways agnostic, and we're supplying, when it looks like something like quantum, we're supplying almost all of the major technology companies themselves with the enabling technologies behind that. So that can be our great strength as well. If you look at something like quantum communications, a UK spin-out called Arcit, is one of the world leaders in quantum safe communications technology. It recently won an award at the Mobile World Congress. That's a UK spin-out startup.
So have you got, the UK's got 2.5 billion in, and we've already seen 4 billion of commercial revenues coming back to these companies, and we have an ambition to see, pick a figure. Are you tracking it like that?
Yeah, so of the billion, so obviously it's easier to track with what's actually happened to date. So of that billion that's been spent on quantum over the last decade, that's been matched already by about 500 million of private capital.
Yeah.
Now, given that's quite early stage, I mean, if it was later stage, you would expect a greater amplification, but that's what we can already see from that first billion. I've got lots of tables of data. I'd be very happy to follow up with some more data. I don't want to read out a table. It's not
that's
great.
Cool. So where we are is we're successfully drawing in private capital, but what we're not necessarily seeing is those companies at a point of profitability where they're returning tax revenues to the exchequer.
Correct, because and I think we should be realistic. This is a deep tech style investment curve.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies, if not pre-revenue, are predominantly deriving their revenues from other research and development programs. So they might be working on cryogenics and supplying those cryogenic tools to other companies in this emerging sector rather than end users as of today. We track all of the big major UK quantum companies, funds, and how much that they're raising. Super happy to. I've got Appendix 34 in my pack, which I'll write to the committee and share that data.
Oh, bless you, thank you. So do you have a personal instinct, a ministerial instinct, about when this sector is going to start returning revenues to the Exchequer?
I think, first of all, it's quite a diverse sector. So I'd love to answer a simple question in a more simple way. But as we know, there is quantum secure communications, which is pretty proximate, right? There are financial institutions who right now are purchasing that. That's a revenue model. It'll turn profitable in the very near term. Quantum computing, you can sell a lot of shovels to gold miners, as it were, right now. So if you're doing the enabling technology, the error correction software, the advanced cryogenics, some of the advanced photonic chip creation, again, there are markets for those products right now. As for end user ready quantum computers, cleverer people than me, and it's embedded in our quantum missions to be producing products out of the UK that would be the sort of commercial products that people would use in end user applications. Medical sensing, very close. I visited Nottingham. They're working with quantum sensing, using quantum style technologies to do sensing right now.
It's a simple and almost unfair question because you're spread betting on so many different options effectively.
And it's a diverse sector, and different parts of the sector will have different return attributes. And again, as a government, not just purely looking through a financial lens, though that is incredibly important when we are allocating taxpayers' money, some of these are also enabling technologies for the work of government itself. So if we look at domains like position, navigation and timing, government is a big end user of that, not exclusively. Even in this market, when you think about medical sensing or quantum augmentation of AI applications for scanning body tissues, as it happens in this market, that is also the government is the far and away and often exclusively the only customer. So we should think about the returns as well as productivity tools to the government sector.
Very fair. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, could I, Mr. Newby, just kind of coming back onto that theme, very grateful to the Minister for demonstrating the depth of his passion and knowledge on this one. How's the Office for Quantum kind of picking that up? What's your priority actions now to drive this commercialisation?
We've been established to help orchestrate activity across the programme under the new ambition of the 2.5 billion over 10 years. And commercialisation is right at the heart of it. So as we were discussing before, a large part of our focus at the moment is developing the proposed activity under the missions. We developed those in partnership with the sector and delivery partners in UKRI ahead of the autumn statement. And the idea was to give really concrete, ambitious outcomes that could help drive private investment. And we're building the programmes underneath those now. We're also working to build international partnerships, which will be absolutely key to maintain the kind of competitiveness of the UK sector. So making sure that we have the right R&D collaborations in place, the right supply chains in place. And we're building the evidence for what next on the programme in other areas as well. So we've touched on infrastructure. Skills is absolutely critical, and talent as well. So we're supporting the Quantum Skills Task Force, led by Professor Sheila Rowan, to give us advice on those. So they're just a few areas where we're getting further advice on how we evolve the programme to drive commercialisation.
That's cool. Are you doing progress reports? So have you got one due? Or?
We actually provided a progress report as part of the refreshed Science and Tech framework in February, and we'll continue to provide public updates as we have sort of new updates.
Right, so it's more a little and often on reporting back on the implementation of the strategy. Right, yes. So there's not a big set piece event that the committee needs to wait for.
I wouldn't say there's a single set-piece event because we're providing updates all the time, and it was quite a comprehensive update as part of the S&T framework refresh. But I would expect that we'll provide a further update by the summer on some of the activities that we've described.
You've got the infrastructure report, and then you've got the detailed plans behind the missions to come out. And then later on a skills report. So all of those are sort of a collection of reports.
And the plans are going to have like the kind of, specific and targeted and measurable outcomes on them. Yeah, sorry, you can tell what job I used to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. Minister, can I just ask something about Horizon, our participation in Horizon Europe, which we agreed associate membership. Am I right in thinking that our access to research on quantum technologies is excluded from that?
I don't know, Mr. Chairman. I would be surprised, given we've talked about how broad quantum is, because it's not one technology, it's photonics, it's some physics, some sensing technologies.
Exactly.
So no one has quite put it to me in that way.
Yeah, shall I come in here? So there are quantum-related calls that the UK has been excluded from for this coming financial year. That is because the Commission has judged them strategically sensitive. We have made representations to the Commission that our own programme is an open programme, and we're very keen to participate, and that dialogue is ongoing. It is worth saying that there are other calls that will be relevant to quantum companies that they may participate in. So it won't just be the kind of quantum-specific ones that benefit from them. And obviously, the quantum ecosystem benefits from access to Horizon and the kind of benefits that has to science and tech. There are also other European programs, such as Eureka, that we continue to collaborate on a kind of pan-European basis on quantum.
Did we know that in associating with Horizon, we would be excluded from the quantum or those particular quantum calls?
We were hopeful that we would be provided access, so we didn't know for certain at the time that would be the case. But I think it's worth saying that the door isn't closed for future access on quantum. This is an annual process that the Commission goes through in terms of refreshing those calls, and dialogue, as I say, is ongoing on future participation.
Are you aware of other aspects of research funded by Horizon from which we've been unexpectedly excluded?
I believe that high-performance computing also is an area of exclusion, but I'm not aware of others beyond that.
And, I mean, that seems to me, and we've only recently discovered this, it's very helpful to have that confirmed and explained. This is very unsatisfactory. The part of the point of participating in these across Europe and beyond collaborations is that we're bringing together UK expertise with others around the world in some of the most promising areas. To be excluded from some of the most interesting and promising areas is very unsatisfactory. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree that we would strongly like to participate, and the Secretary of State herself has made representations to the Commission on this matter. And dialogue is ongoing, and we are continuing to share information on our own programmes and hope to be able to participate in future.
And when would you say that this is for this year? This is clearly ongoing. When are decisions made about future calls, and is there any reason to believe that access will be restored for future programmes?
So I believe decisions will be made this autumn for the following year. I would say that discussions are relatively positive in that lots of information is being shared and constructive in terms of different conversations that are happening with different parts of the system. Obviously, I can't anticipate what the Commission will decide, but we're pushing as hard as we can on this.
Minister, I assume that you share my dismay at this news, this development.
One is dismayed at anything that puts friction on international science collaboration. And to be clear, we put no frictions on that. UKRI programmes themselves fund up to 30% of participants, for example, in doctoral programs from overseas explicitly. So we want the broadest range of collaboration. I was talking yesterday to the Swiss, who we have an MOU with, about collaborations in areas like quantum. So it's certainly not coming from us. And of course it is regrettable if anybody seeks to put frictions in the way of international science collaboration.
You were involved in and certainly aware of the discussions about acceding to associate membership with Horizon. I think whether were you in the Treasury at the time when it was concluded?
Yeah, I wasn't involved, to be truthful, Mr. Chairman.
Right. So you don't know whether there was, as it were, kind of warning given during those discussions that actually we might be excluded from certain programmes?
I do not know that. I see.
But it would be, kind of like you to say, give your view as to whether it would be unsatisfactory that having taken this decision that we might be excluded from future programmes that are of great scientific importance without the right, as it seems, to insist on that participation.
Well, look, I think you put it well, Mr. Chairman. I think on the flip side, we should be very positive. We're one of the world's leading nations in all of these quantum technologies. We attract the second largest amount of investment into quantum from private capital in the world. Our technology is, often in the supply chain of almost every major quantum project in almost every major market. So I agree with your point. I mean, it would be on some levels odd to exclude, a outward-leaning, collaborative nation that's one of the world's leading science in this domain as well as others from international collaboration. The whole point of wonderful projects like Horizon, the world's biggest international collaboration project, is to collaborate. The clue is in the name.
Well, indeed, and insofar as Britain, as I think we have established during this inquiry, has a particular strength in quantum technologies, for Horizon to say that they don't want to collaborate or won't allow us to collaborate with that, is that not concerning that that scientific discovery might be suborned to other, perhaps more political purposes?
As I say, Mr. Chairman, you put it well, but in the meantime, we will control what we can control. We've got an ambitious set of plans. We're going to be announcing more quantum hubs in the UK in the future. There's this very significant increase in our investments coming up for the next 10 years. And I would just put it to anyone that I think the UK has a great deal to offer as a collaboration partner in quantum, as in so many other technologies.
Thank you very much for that. You've been very clear. I'll go back to Carol Monaghan and then Dawn Butler.
Minister, if I could start with you. We've heard a lot of evidence that there are concerns around the workforce, skilled workforce, particularly when we're talking about areas like quantum. What work is your department doing with the Department of Education to try and look at this and tackle this?
Well, in particular, we've got a piece of work ongoing. Is it Dr. Sheila Rowan, Professor Sheila Rowan, which is being led to look at skills in this space, and I look forward to sharing that with the committee. It'll be they wanted a little bit more time to do that work in a little bit more depth, so we'll try and get the balance right between moving that forward at pace, but also giving those that we've asked to lead that work the time and space to do so. We work very collaboratively with the Department of Education. We clearly have shared equities in continuing to promote our great universities as fantastic seats of research. That is vital. It's one reason why the quantum hubs, are embedded within universities. Birmingham, Glasgow, Oxford. I always get it wrong. Is it York? There you go, I got it right.
We're going to sit silently and wait till you've got
and we've got more hubs along the way. So I think we're very embedded. There are a lot of quantum-related, either directly quantum or quantum-related technologies, centres for doctoral training.
You're talking just now very high level.
Right.
How are we going to make sure there is a pipeline of talent coming through? What work's been done at school level to ensure that we've got the right people coming through? What work's been done to make sure we've got physics teachers, in schools that are actually going to be delivering the subjects that are required in order to feed that pipeline?
Yeah, I think the
And
best place to point
to
point that to actually is the relevant education department for the particular nation that we're talking about. It's not that I wouldn't have a view. I just don't think it's particularly fair. We don't do sub-18 education. We fund research. Now, of course, we have very strong equities in making sure there's a huge pipeline of STEM, and as we see technologies like quantum come and occupy big parts of the research domain, the hunger for STEM is even stronger. It's within our department, we've sponsored the new Mathematics Academy. That will go a long way to trying to promote a new generation of mathematicians, and that will of course help. But we have relatively limited equities in this space, Carol.
I understand that, and the reason I'm asking these questions is it's not good enough, I believe, for one department to take responsibility to that point and another department to take responsibility after, when actually what your department is doing has been highly influenced or impacted by what is happening in another department. So it would be useful to know if there were any plans to have discussions with the Department of Education on this area.
May I come in on that?
Please do.
So it's worth saying that the DFE is involved in the task force that the Minister mentioned and have been working with us really closely on our future plans. As he said, that the priority obviously in terms of STEM investment has to start right at the bottom, and they've committed 600 million over the next 2 years, including to help retain teachers in STEM professions, which is going to be really important.
Sorry, just could you give detail in that? Is it increasing salary? How is it going to retain these teachers?
I'm afraid I don't have any further detail.
Okay.
I would be happy to follow up on that. So I suppose they have the kind of starting building blocks for that. From a quantum perspective, we have initiatives such as a Quantum Ambassadors Programme, which we are funding with STEM Learning, working with DFE, which is about helping train teachers to deliver to sixth form students basically modules on this is what quantum science is, this is what quantum technologies are, to raise aspiration to go into this field. It's a small part of the pitch, but it's an important one. And many of the announcements that the Secretary of State made just 2 weeks ago at the Maths Summit will also be supporting a kind of pipeline from school onwards. So, for example, the apprenticeship scheme that she announced will be picking up off the work that the DFE are doing.
Can I ask about more about this quantum skills plan? Have a slight concern that people working in industry come to us and they say we can't get the people to do this. Now, there are very few people with the skills required, and there's lots of interested parties in these few people. Surely what we need is bright young people that can be trained up to do what's required. Surely they don't need a PhD in order to go in. Should industry be taking more responsibility to actually train people in the skills that are required?
Shall I respond to that? I mean, that is a big focus of the task force's work, because to get the level of talent that we need for the sector to grow, it won't just be state-funded training. It will be on-the-job training. It will be taking technicians from sort of broad engineering backgrounds and helping them understand, for example, how to build a quantum computer. And industry is really interested in this. It's worth saying that these are mostly startups, and so on-the-job training is challenging in that environment, but as they grow and scale, they will be able to invest more in that, and that's why we're looking at things like apprenticeship programs to sort of facilitate them in doing so.
Will you be monitoring what companies are actually participating in such things?
Absolutely, and we've already had a lot of input from companies through the task force telling us their plans. So I think a key part of any skills action plan has to be understanding how that evolves over time, and we'll of course monitor it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Dawn Butler, then Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both. Minister, you obviously spend a lot of time thinking about quantum and its sort of practical implications. I'm just wondering, what is your vision? How do you see quantum, both its application, how it's going to work, both positively and negatively?
My vision is it's not a technology vision, it's for the UK. And this is a big part of the answer to the question, how does the UK compete in a very competitive global world where access to skilled labour, to capital, many other of the ingredients of the modern economy are in relative abundance. Very different from the world that I was born into. And so the science and technology framework seeks to answer that by identifying, having worked with industry, with others, with the Royal Academies, what are the areas that the UK are going to be prodigiously good at? Engineering, biology, AI, future telecoms, and quantum. And that's a set of choices. It is a little bit like an industrial strategy, if you like. This is the charter for the areas in which we want to put our mind time in government, some of your taxpayers' money, make sure we've got the right skills, and that we're sending signals of leadership to the industry so they know that we've got their back, and when they're trying to figure out what long-term demand curves look like, they can understand the government's position. So that's really the work of department. These aren't the only domains, to be clear. We've got things like the creative industries, the core life sciences, but that's the work of the department. That's the role of the Secretary of State and us ministers in the department. So my vision is that the UK is one of a handful of world-class competitors in this space, building on our really strong science base. Some of the institutions we've heard about, the National Physics Laboratory, some of the assets that we've got in Harwell, but the photonics in Scotland as well. So we successfully harness all of these assets, our legacy, if you like, and turn those into global scale companies, right, or global companies choosing to operate here, creating jobs, creating ladders of opportunity for people, creating adjacent sectors to things like quantum that can be part of those supply chains.
Thanks.
Sorry, it's a big question.
Very comprehensive response, thank you. And some people must have said, okay, but we should be worried about X, Y, Z, or this might be a concern. What have been those concerns that have been raised?
Yeah. The biggest, and I didn't fully answer your questions, my apologies, but the biggest concern that I have, if you like, the thing that I wake up in the small hours of the morning worrying, is that we get left behind, that we're just a bit too slow, that we're right about the opportunity, we're right about the impact on society, not one domain, but many domains.
There's no fears at all about the technology in any way?
Look, there are always fears about any new technology having nefarious uses. It's why we're working heavily with the NCSC, why we're making sure that we're controlling exports of particularly sensitive parts of the technology. It's why in a global technology race that does have some geopolitical consequences, that it is imperative that the UK continues to have access to the deepest capabilities, that we're not excluded or outcompeted in this domain. So there are some concerns.
About security?
But you asked my biggest one, and my biggest one is that actually we're just not agile enough. We just don't rotate skills, or we don't get the funding councils to allocate money across from different sectors quickly enough.
Thank you. And in that fear to not be left behind, are we fully considering the security and the privacy issues that might be?
Yes, I think we are. I wouldn't be complacent about it. It's an emerging domain. We're working with both the companies who are producing these technologies, because in emerging technologies, it will tend to be that what's possible will be led by actually those who are operating at the cutting edge of that. But we're also working with national security. We're working with the National Cyber Security Centre, who see this every day. We're building some of those capabilities ourselves, for example, in position, navigation and timing. We saw the example It's very retail, but we saw the example of the Defence Secretary's plane losing access to the global positioning satellite signal. Part of the importance of the work being done by my department, but also by other government departments around position, navigation and timing, is to provide resilience against that sort of new technology that others have now got access to.
And how about natural resources? Obviously, the development of quantum is going to take a lot of natural resources, whether it be water, energy. What have you been doing in your department to understand the need for natural resources, and if there's a 360 kind of innovation, so what do you do with the amount of water that is needed, for example? What do you do with that water that's coming out the other end to cool quantum computers?
I'm very happy to have a follow-up discussion because I don't know enough to answer your question fairly today, but there are many fantastic environmental and climate applications of quantum, both quantum sensing to detect particles like methane in the atmosphere, single photon sensing, being able to predict landscape movement and evolution over time. And my hope and my optimistic bias, if you like, is that as these new technologies come and scale, that we as mankind put them to good use. And if that's optimizing a traffic network so that we have less congestion and less pollution and make a fixed amount of resources be more productive, then that seems to me the likely way in which we can put these to good uses. And if there are incremental energy consumption, for example, more than offset those by making our society more productive and our resources more optimized.
Thank you. Mr. Newby, you wanted to jump in.
I might add, so a couple of points. Just to go back to privacy, I just wanted to mention that the Information Commissioner's Office has done some work already on quantum technologies. They published a report back in 2022, which was a scoping report, and they are planning to publish further study on this year. So they are starting the thinking on the privacy implications of quantum computing, but also quantum sensing, because obviously it'll be gathering information, and it's important that we have the kind of controls in place to do that. On environmental implications, so these are technologies that are likely to rely on critical components, precious metals, minerals and things like that. Exactly which depends on the platform we take. So the government's current approach is to explore different kinds of quantum computing platform. That was the announcement we made recently. We will be exploring 7 different modalities in the National Quantum Computing Centre. And as part of that, it will allow us to assess the scalability of those platforms. And part of that has to be, what are the access to the minerals that are required? And realistically, what are the environmental implications of scaling that up? So that is something that we'll be thinking about with the National Quantum Computing Centre as they test some of that work.
Right. And have we got a strong ethical thread running through all of that?
Well, we're seeking, and we have received advice from the Regulatory Horizons Council on how we think about ethics in relation to quantum technologies, and we plan to respond to that in the next 3 months. Ethics obviously has to be really key to how we think about these technologies. It's also, I think, worth saying that we are, because we're at the early stages of development, we can put in place broad principles for governing how these might develop. But the key thing is equipping our regulators and innovators with the tools to develop more detailed thinking on ethics as they understand the applications better, because really there's a lot of uncertainty about the path of these technologies at the moment. So part of our response to the Regulatory Horizons Council report will outline some of our thinking there.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Stephen Metcalfe and Chris Clarkson.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good morning, both. Just interested in the work the government is doing to sort of stimulate investment into the sector. Does the government have a specific programme to incentivise private investment? And if it does, how does that work? And do you have any concerns that potentially the work you're doing could end up not paying the dividend here in the UK, that it would end up paying the dividend somewhere else?
me start with the big picture and you can talk about some of the programs. Look, that is a concern. It's a concern, I think, more generally. I think we had some of the previous speakers talk about that as well. This need, particularly as it relates to deep technology, which is really code for a long runway before, from the moment you're trying to scale to the point at which it becomes self-sustaining, generating revenue and cash flow. So that is generic to the UK growth sectors and spin-outs from science and technology, and it's particularly specific for quantum, both because the scale of opportunity is very large, but also the runway to that profitability is quite long by definition. Now, most of this sits within the work that our brilliant colleagues in the Treasury have been doing to mobilise additional private capital. There is a lot of public money gone in, both in terms of direct research and development, but also a whole slew of innovations, future fund breakthrough, all the way through to at the latter stages of scale up, things like the UK Infrastructure Bank with its near 20 billion of potential investable resources. So there's a lot of sort of public money going in there, and it is right that continues to make sure it pivots towards the less mature technologies. There's always a danger that they overinvest in things that look relatively low risk and don't rotate that public capital, which should have a high risk appetite against it, into areas like quantum. So as a department, one of our roles is to ensure that for all of those public forms of capital investment, that they are properly understanding the opportunities in quantum. And more generally, the work that the Chancellor and others did on the Mansion House reforms, on the Edinburgh reforms, which are about trying to mobilise private risk capital, the biggest pool of which is pension capital in the UK. We're blessed by the second largest pool of private pension capital of any country on the planet, but it's very fragmented. Some of the rules and regulations of the financial regulators have meant that has to be very liquid. And liquidity is axiomatic if you're looking at long-term growth investment. So there's a lot of work that's gone on. The Mansion House reforms and the compact itself, to give you a number, talked about the opportunity to mobilise up to 75 billion between now and 2030. So that's a fairly near-term time horizon when it comes to allocating that capital. And as that goes into more liquid asset classes, one may expect some of that, a proportion, to flow into the higher risk end of things, high return, like quantum. The final point, Mr. Metcalfe, is the recently announced long-term investment for technology and science, something that is almost directly at the core of this committee. If there's ever a fund that would be of interest to this committee, it is the LIFTs. The government has recently awarded the mandate to manage that 250 million pot of capital, the idea being that would condense other capital around it, and of that 250, 150 million will be directed squarely at the sort of technology that quantum represents. So those are some of the interventions. Okay. We've got the science, we've got the smarts, we don't always have the scale-up capital, and there's a lot that's gone on there. In terms of, there are some specific pots of money for quantum specifically as well.
Okay. I'll come back in a second, but...
Very sure. I mean, the other just programmes I would just add to the mix of what the Minister outlined is the National Security Strategic Investment Fund is a really important intervention for quantum. A number of its investments have focused on quantum technologies as well. And there are a number of the British Business Bank programmes which basically fund venture capital funds who in turn have funded quantum companies. So they've helped build some of the scale of capital the Minister has outlined.
Okay. Thank you for that. And that was all very informative. But if me as an investor has a pocket load of dosh, are you incentivising me to in any way invest that in quantum startups, quantum technology companies, or would there's no greater benefit from doing that than investing in other areas of potential growth with equal amount of risk? So there's no particular incentive that comes from government.
Well, depending how large your pocket of cash is, Mr. Metcalfe, I would advocate schemes like the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme or the EIS or some VCT.
And I'll do better out
trusts.
of that if it's invests in quantum.
Well, there are I mean, you'll ultimately have to make your own decision. I hope we've heard today, the potential of quantum and its attractiveness as a long-term investment. But we're not giving investment advice.
No.
But I
stocks may go up as well as down.
I think even if we look at this domain and some of the successful companies, they have actually benefited from those schemes, and you and others could have invested at the sort of angel and seed level. So thereafter, I think there are more. Some institutional support would be helpful.
Okay. And so where foreign investment comes in and fills those gaps, are you concerned in any way that the companies that are in their sort of nascent state at the moment, as they grow, will actually not deliver the wider economic benefit here in the UK? They'll end up moving off to other countries where they will be scaled up to maximise their potential.
Yes, that is a concern. That was the insight behind the work that the Treasury has done in this domain. We should not prescribe outcomes. It will be inevitable in a global market, and these technologies tend to be global enablers, that some of those companies will decide the right way for them. But we want every company to have a choice. And so at each funding round stage, we want there to be some UK capital that's available if those companies choose to do it, without denying them the choice, without putting up walls and barriers, but giving them that opportunity, which of course means they're more likely to stay here for longer, to list here, to build a supply chain here, to support small businesses here, and ultimately to benefit British pensioners or British investors here. So we want people to have that choice, and that was the work that the Treasury led on those sort of reforms.
Okay, great. Thank you. A couple more, if I may, Chair. Firstly, with regards to the government and its buying power, it's a great procurer of technology. You mentioned, I think, you have acquired some quantum services.
Yes.
Are there any particular successes you would like to highlight? I think you talked about positioning and timings and things, and any particular failures that you may not wish to talk about but that we should be aware of.
In many ways, I hope you don't take this the wrong way and regard it as recklessness, but I think there should be failures, and if the government never fails, then the government isn't taking enough risk to pump prime the sector. Government has made some purchases. I mean, the government was an early procurer of a quantum computer from Orca. We are looking, obviously, in the position, navigation and timing space. The government has funded not just basic science, but a significant amount of innovation. And to your point about, and these aren't either success or failures yet, but to your point about government as a purchaser, the Quantum Catalyst Fund, I think that's the right one, gave grants to different government bodies or public sector organisations in order that they can look at the applications and use cases of quantum. And so that's designed to put government in a position, because it's not just about direction, it's about them having the understanding, the knowledge, understanding the potential of a new technology. The idea is to put government departments in a position that they can be a procurer, an early procurer of these services, because again, we do hear for many of these companies, part of the journey to scaling up could be forward procurement or at least smart procurement from the government early on.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
I'll do justice to that.
Yes, sorry, Tom.
Absolutely, if I may.
Tom has no failures.
Obviously.
I don't have any failures to highlight, but I'm sure that there will be in time. In the position, navigation and timing space, this is something the Ministry of Defence is really focused on. So a good example is in the Rimmer Pacific Naval Exercise with Five Eyes partners in 2022. We joined up and basically trialled for the first time a particular form of quantum navigation that can be used in satellite-denied environments. And another trial was carried out by the Royal Navy last year with Imperial College. And these could be really important both for military uses, of course, but also for civil uses as well. So that, I think, is a very interesting application.
Thank you. And one final question, if I may, which is around potential regulation assessing the technology. I think it was the Regulatory Horizon Council in its review suggested a regulatory forum for quantum technology. Is that something the department agrees with? What work is being done on that? What would the timescale be for regulation?
My view is it's quite early days. I mean, the Regulatory Horizon Council identified some high-level questions, some principles. We will respond, as we commit to always do, within 3 months of their report. I thought it was a good useful piece of work. Whether the right thing, just be quite open, Mr. Metcalfe, whether the right thing is a particular forum, when there are many forums, there is an office for quantum that we in government would look to lead. And I'm not sure we're devoid of forums or conversations about this. So whether you formally designate a particular, wise group as the forum, or whether you continue in quite a diverse space with some quite different regulatory threads and risks, whether you just keep that conversation going with all of those who've got views to feed into, in many ways like the Regulatory Horizon Council itself does.
Yeah. When did you say that report arrived on your desk or in the department?
I think I got it about 10 days ago, and we commit to respond to all the RHC reports within 3 months. So you can hold me to that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you
very much, Stephen. Chris Clarkson and then Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. So sticking with the Regulatory Horizon Council's review, one of its findings was that the UK should leverage its existing expertise in this area, its global position in quantum, to drive some thinking about global quantum standards and the regulatory piece that we've just discussed. So off that, Minister, what steps is your department taking at this stage to engage with domestic and international partners to realise that, especially since we've just heard that our friends in Horizon have said l'ordinateur quantique dit non, or quantum computer says no?
Very good. So we're doing a lot of international engagement. I'll let Tom add to the list if I miss any. We're working with the OECD, Global Forum on Technology. I'll be going to the G7 Science Ministers meeting in Italy later this year. There is a NATO quantum strategy group, as you would perhaps expect as well. And there are quite a lot of international standards organisations. I won't read out the entire list of acronyms, but we are doing a lot internationally. Sometimes those are at government level, also often they're at particular institute level, so the National Physics Institute or the Quantum Computing Centre will participate in those forums.
Is there any concern that we're going to end up in sort of roughly the same space we are with AI at the moment, where everybody's sort of rushed to try and sort of regulate this thing to death, but in vastly different ways, so we don't actually come to a sort of a single track on these things? I mean, helpfully we've had the AI Safety Summit, but do you envisage there might have to be some sort of quantum forum where we all get together and start talking about what the optimal space looks like? Or are you concerned, for example, the EU is going to regulate it to death, the Americans will just let the market decide, and we'll try and do something based on what we always do, which is use what we've got?
I'm sure we will do something brilliantly well, but I'll just go back to a little bit, and probably one of the things I think we've got right with AI is trying to regulate the uses rather than the technology itself. And remember, here we are talking about some very different technologies. One minute you're doing some organ tissue sensing, the next day what's under the ground geological work. Then you may be doing something around particular forms of encryption. That's probably one of the things that's coming at us from a regulatory space a bit further ahead of others. And then there's quantum computing itself, which, without oversimplifying, is just a much faster version of the sort of computers that we have today. And there are already some very powerful computers in the world that are orders of many magnitude faster than anyone else's computers. So it is quite a complex domain. I think the right conversations are going on, so I don't want to pass judgment what's happened in the past to AI. This is also perhaps not moved at quite the same speed. Quantum computing is a mature field. I met somebody the other day who said they've been working in quantum computing for 30 years.
This really sort of what the thrust of my question was. I mean, it's been around for a while, but what we sort of we're finding now as it becomes more prevalent and we're sort of moving forward in the field is that at some stage we're going to have to consider this, and obviously because we're very well placed with our international position, are we taking a leadership role there?
If I might add on that, so we have been instrumental in the creation of what we call the Group of 13, which is a set of like-minded countries thinking about the governance and approach to enabling quantum technologies and really setting the agenda there. And a number of the fora that the Minister mentioned, such as the OECD's structure on this, we helped set up in the first place. It was also announced just recently that the first dedicated sort of International Quantum Standards Committee would have a British secretariat, so the British Standards Institute, which means we're extremely well placed there. And we are a convener of a number of European groups on standards, so we are really driving the conversations in lots of these forums. They are early conversations because of the nature of the development, but I think everyone is very mindful of the lessons from AI, and they're really a big part of the focus as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And Rebecca Long-Bailey.
This is just a very brief question, Minister. You mentioned controlling exports earlier. I just wonder if you could elaborate and set out what measures the government has currently got in place in relation to export controls and what future plans the government has in terms of balancing national security concerns against international collaboration.
We're not the lead department for this. We advise the Department for Business and Trade and the Cabinet Office on that. They've recently laid a statutory instrument to include some quantum technologies, cryogenics, as part of the what is within scope for national for export controls. Obviously, the National Security and Investment Act, quantum is one of the domains named within that. So we have a well-developed architecture. The actual individual determination is both by category and by each individual company and use case. But it'll be very familiar with the normal architecture that we have. If you want to add anything.
So the controls that were announced last week will apply to a number of emerging technologies. Among them will be quantum computers and related components. It is worth saying that those have been brought forward in anticipation that like-minded partners will also put in place similar controls. And we think that it is really important to put those in place in terms of the security of the technologies, but we also believe having this licensing regime really clearly set out will create stability for our industry because it's predictable. We have other levers like the military end-use controls, but they are applied more on an ad hoc basis, so this upfront licensing helps create predictability in the regime.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Catherine Fletcher has a final supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. So, back to Carol's point about how do we inspire the next generation. I mean, some of the quantum sensing technologies that you're describing, it strikes me that we're effectively starting the journey to invent the Star Trek tricorder that stands on the planet and says the ore is over there. So, you mentioned, Tom, helping teachers with modular training to bring their knowledge and skills up to speed so that they can do the brilliant job that they do, inspiring people. Have you got any plans to make that available more broadly? I get to some extent we want to maintain the UK's competitive advantage on this, but I'm quite sure that there's a ton of 12-year-old little girls and boys that would quite like to go into a field that's going to invent the Star Trek tricorder. Are you going to put some of that stuff online?
So we don't currently have a plan to put it online, but this is something that we're asking the Quantum Skills Task Force to explore with professionals in the field, because what we want to understand is what's the right way of doing this that is truly inspirational, and what's the right stage to come in. And I should be open that there's debate amongst members of the task force and the experts that are advising us on whether how early do you sort of bring quantum in? Because there is a risk it's quite a complicated topic. We think there are benefits to demystifying it, but there are also benefits in just promoting
general access to STEM, because that will then create the talent pool that benefits quantum technologies, but of course other technologies as well.
What it could be used for. That's often the most exciting part of science and application, isn't it? Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Newby, for your evidence today. Thank you to our earlier witnesses. That concludes this meeting of committee. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.